Our last talk is by Dr. John Murray. And this slide says he's an assistant professor of digital media. But for my academic folks in the room, he has just received tenure pending the board. How are you?
Thank you for that introduction. How's everybody doing? So you may or may not know me as a director at large. Here at Couple of Fern, where I have no responsibility for the newsletter and consult on the website and a few other things. I also study games and platforms. So I'm a game designer. I'm not really expecting anyone in this room to be either a computer scientist or a game designer, but games are pretty cool things. How many people here identify as a gamer or feel like they game enough to say, I'm a gamer? All right. Okay. How many people here have played Wordle before? That's a large number of people who played a game in this room but don't identify as gamers. So
How many people program?
yeah, all right. How many people program and create games? Excellent. We have one person. Fantastic. So basically, we have different relationships to games because games aren't one thing. There's a variety of different games. There are games that bring us together socially. There are games that pass the time, games that stimulate us intellectually, and games that potentially can convey messages or accomplish tasks. And this talk today is going to be about how games can serve environmental causes, especially through something called serious games. Keep going to my computer, but I need to go. So I'm going to talk about a variety of games that address different audiences, have different techniques, different mechanics, and also ones that you may have heard of or may not have heard of, and how maybe knowing about these games gives you another tool to perhaps tell others, check out this game in addition to checking out this location or this reserve or other things you may do to spread your knowledge and interest in plants and the environment. So has anyone heard the term serious games before? See a couple of hands. All right, so I told you that games have a lot of purposes. Clearly, playing tag on the playground is not a serious game. Serious games are usually classified as games that have a purpose. So they're used in education. So edutainment is one example. They could be basically promoting a political cause or bringing awareness to something. So there's a number of games that bring awareness to how iPhones are made, or that are otherwise bringing awareness to certain types of systemic problems in society that don't have enough attention. Now, the ways that games engage could be through the mechanic itself. The mechanic could actually give you a lesson on the topic it's teaching. So it could be that you come to realize that the mechanic shows you the problem inherent in trying to do a good job with a really challenging task, like perhaps controlling terrorism. So these are some non-environmental games. One of them is called September 12th. It was published in 2003. The entire point of the game was basically a point-and-click game with a bunch of villagers and terrorists. And when you clicked on it to send a warhead in, it would inevitably destroy the buildings and create more terrorists. It made sort of a rhetorical point at a time in which we were discussing the war on terror on September 11th. And it was a different method than a political cartoon to get that message across, that it's very hard to fight terrorism with weapons alone when they may in turn create more terrorism as a result. The one on the right is Papers, Please, another serious game that addresses basically the impact of totalitarianism governments and also the dangers of certain governments that are heading towards there. I highly recommend checking it out. Now, on the environmental side of things, has anyone heard of this game? No? All right, so Walden is a game created by University of Southern California in a partnership to essentially create a game form version of So I'll let this trailer play for just a few minutes because there's a lot of stuff to cover. You collect plants, you go fishing, you ride a boat, you do all these things you don't typically expect to play in a game. Maybe one where you want to beat someone at Mario Kart or maybe use a weapon or a shooter or something. So this is the type of game where your contemplation and your relationships to the natural environment is the point of the game. And there's a lot of content in there for the changing seasons, discovering, of course, works by Thoreau, and of course, lots of audio that's being played as well. And you get to go into the the town and interact with villagers and learn more about the context of his works. So this is a great piece to enter into his works and a great way to capture students, especially K through 12, interest in transcendentalism and
Turn off the music.
yeah, sorry. It's a little too much music there. Apologies.
I'd
So
rather hear the birds.
yeah.
It was like meditation music.
So it's been recognized in a number of festivals and even film festivals because it's hard to tell, like, okay, that's a game, right? So why isn't it getting game-like recognition? Well, it does have some indicate, but it also has film festival recognition. This is another trend we're going to get into is what is the clear line between a game that has narrative and literary content and say a short film? Well, that definitely starts to get a little blurry as we talk about these topics that aren't traditionally the domain of games, such as environmental causes or even stories about empowerment. So here, speaking of stories about empowerment, this is a virtual reality game released in 2001 by Baobab Studios. Has anyone used VR in this room? Virtual reality, raise your hands. Okay, only a few. So virtual reality is a very new technology, but it has this huge potential to bring people elsewhere through its immersion. So think about having your entire vision replaced by a virtual environment that updates as you look around. So in order to bring children, for instance, on field trips to the Antarctica or to environments like under the ocean, you would be able to get them a lot more immersed and present in these other environments using a VR field trip, for instance. Now, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be brought out to the scrub and brought out to nature every chance they can, absolutely, but this gives you also another opportunity as a different form of storytelling. So in this particular one, you are gathering medicine for your mother with your sister, and you encounter some recognizable voices. So this is one that's much more on the narrative side than it is on the. So this is a new example of combining fairly linear storytelling with voice acting with a first-person perspective. So you get to do some stuff in there, make a few choices, but primarily the characters are directly interacting with you, and that gives you a new perspective on the emotional connection, for instance, with the witch and your sister when you get to directly make eye contact with them. Very hard to do in a flat screen experience. And this one is one that, again, managed to partner with the UN, which I'll talk more later about raising awareness for environmental causes, and managed to receive a number of film awards, and of course has a cast. Notice I listed Jennifer Hudson twice, she's that important. And is a great example of how you can, in a short amount of time. So this experience is only about 20 minutes. It doesn't take hours and hours of gameplay, which is the case for a lot of people's perception of games, is that they take like 20 hours, 40 hours, especially for AAA games. Now, this is only 20 to 30 minutes of gameplay, but it could have a lasting impression because you have that visceral experience of being there, something we call presence in virtual reality. Now, how many people here play board games? I see a larger number of hands of people who said they weren't gamers, but you're playing board games, but you don't identify as gamers. So a lot of people think of board games as like Monopoly and Scrabble and these other traditional American games. So there's a variety of games that go beyond simply the ones that we're familiar with. Now, there's games by the maker of Pandemic, which I'll cover just a little bit later, but this particular one is it's called Cards Against Calamity. It's a play off of the Cards Against Humanity, and it is a simulation that describes how you would manage a town facing various challenges relating to infrastructure, relating to disaster resilience, and it basically puts you in the driver's seat in a way that only the game can. And actually, I'm going to show you just a small sample of the gameplay and ask you to make some of those decisions. So this one is actually on the web. You can run it from your phone. I've played it on your on the phone. It doesn't require a Nintendo Switch. Doesn't require a special gaming platform. And let's just hit play here. Look at the Gulf of Mexico. Choose the lowest level of difficulty. And manage our town as a mayor. So basically, each of these symbols represent different interests in your town that you have to satisfy. Sometimes you make decisions that cost one interest but may benefit another, and that's represented through points because it's a game. And this overall one here on the left is community resilience, which you can think of as the overall sentiment of the town to potentially help each other that could be worn down over time or could be built up through various decisions. So again, I'm just going to show a sample couple of gameplays here. Have a nice little social feed on the right. And our first decision appears at the bottom. So on the left, we have points in each of these stakeholder categories, including our popular social approval here, which is the thumbs up sign. And then we have our tourism industry, which we have to support with the martini glass thing. Business and trade, which is the box, manufacturing and trade with crucial components. We've got our fishing industry with the fish here. And we've got our police services, the service workers, and our general resilience is only one. So our first decision is whether to invest in affordable housing, which will cost us one for our social sentiment, since we're using some of our initial capital of being like in the honeymoon period, or we can renovate the harbor, which would be positives for all of these different categories, including popular approval, the fishing industry, and retail. What do you all vote for? You're going to invest in affordable housing, or let's start with affordable housing. Who wants to invest in affordable housing? I know that we should. Okay. Yeah, all right. And renovate harbor. Renovate harbor. I'm seeing more interest in harbor. So let's renovate the harbor. We want a safe place for both fishing vessels and cruise ships. Basically, it may in fact help us when a storm comes if the harbor is in good shape. So it changes our points on all of these, but our overall resilience is still one. So we didn't invest in certain parts of our community to overcome adversity, but we stored some points in other places. So now we have a break in the supply chain. A local seafood distributor is shut down, making it harder for fishermen to efficiently transport their catch to the transportation hub in the middle of the state. Now we have two with bad negative effects on both. We've got to use the neighboring town to help with the supply chain issue. This would cost our fishing industry because we're cutting them out. We're basically saying, we're not going to help you. We're just going to get some fish from next door. And then, you might suffer a little bit, but at the moment, the services and the negative popular opinion would both be affected. Or we could build a replacement, which if we select this, it says invest in your own distribution. This would cost us 2 points in the tourism industry because that construction is an eyesore. Everyone is aware you want to invest in something nice. It's going to hurt potentially tourism for a time, but it will ultimately benefit the business and trade. So this is another nice example of the trade-off, and it's really going to be our last one for this demo. We're going to do a neighboring town or build replacement. Neighboring town. Only one or two? Okay, and build a replacement. Everyone here, self-sufficiency.
Then you would have a problem.
Yeah, okay, so we're gonna select that. And now we have all of our sets up here. Now, we will lose this game if any one of these interests get to 0, and we don't have any community resilience points. So it's okay in the short term to make some compromises, but you don't want any one constituency to otherwise get down too low. And so what this game is using is basically a simulation, kind of like SimCity, to teach you systems thinking and how the different challenges are very interrelated. It's not as simple to simply say one thing has no downsides whatsoever, and more importantly, nobody will be negatively impacted by a decision. And it's one of those more complicated concepts to describe, but if you can see it in a simulation, it's easier to demonstrate and potentially internalize. And a lot of games do convey different insights through simulation. So this
The
is.
social feed was also scarily accurate.
That's true. Everyone will want to voice their opinion if they don't agree with a piece of legislation or a decision. There's almost no way to please everybody. If you try to do that, it ends up you're going to hurt some group so much that it will take you out, essentially, in that case. So I encourage everyone to check it out. I also want to draw attention that this one is also very accessible. It's free and it's on the web. Not all the games that I'm talking about today are free and easily accessible. Yeah, the Environmental Law Institute. So that was one of the sponsors of it, much as the Baba Yaga was co-sponsored by UN actually. And it's definitely an interesting partnership between a game developer and people that are domain experts to help raise awareness around it.
So what happens when you get to the end?
To get to the end, you have to, you either lose in the sense that one of your stakeholders get down to zero and then you basically have to restart, or if you successfully negotiate all of the different stakeholders to the end, you can then go to the next level and have even more challenging decisions up until level 5 or 6 or so. So another game, EcoQuest: The Search for Cetus. Now this one is a classic game. You'll note that the graphics here are very 90s. So this is a classic adventure game. Does everyone here know what an adventure game is? I see a couple of hands. So adventure games is a genre where you essentially interact with the environment, solving puzzles, interacting with characters. It's very different than SimCity or the game we just saw. It's also very different than the interactive narrative we just saw. So in adventure games, you have to think about what is the riddle, what is the solution to this problem I'm facing? Maybe there's something blocking my path, and I have to find the object in the environment and use it to overcome the path, or potentially give it to a character who in turn can help me get past my current obstacle. So adventure games are a great way for people to think critically about things because they're fairly simplistic. They don't require twitch mechanics. They don't require sophisticated gameplay expertise. It's not like a platformer or a Mario game. And there's a wide variety of adventure games out there that address potentially serious topics as well. So EcoQuest, you basically rescue a dolphin. You get introduced to a number of challenges that the dolphin is interested in helping with as you go on a quest with them under the ocean. And apologies for the overlap in the text here, Sierra Online. And it basically is one where as you play it, you learn about the issues of pollution and the impact on marine animals. And this is one that is harder to find and is a little bit less accessible because the graphics are so simplistic. So if you give this to a young child today, they're going to be like, well, the graphics, it's not as engaging as Minecraft. It doesn't have the same fidelity as Fortnite. I'm not sure I'm that into it. And that's where this other adventure game comes in. So Freddy Fish is another game that appeals to younger audiences. It has the same kind of mechanics where you interact with objects, collecting objects, interacting with puzzles, and it introduces you to challenges of living in the ocean and just marine biology in general. So I'll give a very brief, quieter gameplay video. This is often fully animated. We don't get that these days. It's much harder to get fully animated intros to games.
Does the expense?
Yeah, in general, we don't have very many animators because of 3D graphics and because
AI?
yeah, AI. So you set up the story and then you get to control Freddy Fish as Freddy Fish explores the environment. Let me go in here to show you some of the gameplay. So this is a full walkthrough, by the way, so you're seeing the actual gameplay, not just the trailer. Go back, show, come on here. Actually, here. All right, this is. So basically, you click on objects in the environment. There's animations. It's very richly colorful, and there's lots of voice acting as well. So as you solve something in the environment, you can use it to progress to the next level. And of course, you have your companion. Now, some of these puzzles will stump you for a while, and there's like various guides for walkthroughs, and this one is actually a pretty lengthy game. But it is the inspiration for one I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But first, observation. So we talked about a variety of different games aimed at a variety of different audiences, bringing awareness to environmental causes through Walden. We talked about how games can talk through simulation, teach you about the relationships between complex topics like society, policy, and perhaps even political decisions. We talked about basically immersive storytelling in VR and how an encounter with a very powerful story could potentially leave someone with a sense of responsibility for the environment. I recommend checking that out if you ever get a chance to try VR. It's one of the more beautifully animated and fully realized VR interactive narratives. And we could also see that partnerships between institutions and organizations like Couplet Fern and game developers can often achieve more than either could alone. The game developers bring their expertise at understanding the problem and breaking it down into mechanics, and of course, implementing and drawing and programming the game itself. And the experts and the organizations can provide that expertise to make sure the game is grounded in facts and achieves certain educational goals. That, of course, motivates the game that Anastasia and I are developing this summer, called Lost in the Scrub. It is an adventure game that focuses on the Florida scrub jay. We are going to have the scrub jay interact with the environment to raise issues around the decimation of its habitat, the impact of human activities on the natural environment, and of course, the different species and their roles in the environment as keystone species, such as the gopher tortoises, woodpeckers, and other featured characters that you will find in it. We're hoping to launch later this summer and have some beta testers. Here is a sample signage that might accompany the scrub habitat that would point younger users to the game. So after they go to the scrub, they can then play on their phones and learn more about the different inhabitants that they may have seen inhabited while going out into the Florida scrub. And this one is all done from the point of view of Scruffy, again, trying to drive home that first person perspective and that relatability of putting yourself into the scrub jay's perspective and thinking about the environment, the needs for shelter. Why is the scrub a unique habitat? Why is the Florida scrub jay endemic to Florida? And how can humans impact some of the things that scrub jays need to be happy and to enjoy living their life as they want? So we are planning to release a mobile web version for the same reason I mentioned before. So instead of releasing something on Google Play and the Apple App Store where kids might need to have their parents' permission to download it, you could just play it by going to a website and then be able to progress through it by saving your progress. And that also means less work on us for submitting to the app stores. And if you're interested in testing it, you can reach out to me at that email. We'll probably be looking for some beta testers, or we'll be doing a larger release when the game is ready.
What is the age?
So we're aiming for, I think, 5th grade and up. Maybe,
Yeah.
A younger is possible.
could be younger. We're not gonna go for too old of reading age, yeah. So 3rd grade and up, sorry.
Yeah, elementary.
Yeah.
You know what you say in
So
I put plenty of games in elementary and middle school.
Yes.
It could be fun too.
Freddy Fish is engaging for audiences young and old, so just because something might be considered oriented towards children doesn't mean it couldn't be enjoyable for adults as well.
said age 9 to 99,
Exactly. So I talked about board games a little earlier. It was more of a preview. This is one that I highly recommend checking out. It's not only a board game, but now is also a video game called Wingspan. This one is also heavily fact-based, so it's based on the exact wingspans of various birds and their habitats. So in this game, you basically try to cultivate habitats that you attract birds of various species, and of course, you learn about the birds at the same time. It's now been released as I want to say, Nintendo Switch, a few other platforms. So much like we saw with that, it breaks down the topics related to birds into points. It allows the players to make decisions and basically decide which birds they want to attract.
The cards in the board game look identical to that. I haven't.
Yeah,
They're beautiful.
it's really pretty. And so this is just an example of how there's a crossover between board games and video games. So something that has a really great game mechanic on the board game could then be translated into a video game and easier to play potentially if you're traveling. So I highly recommend checking out Wingspan, and I also highly recommend checking out this Kickstarter called Vicious Gardening, which might be of interest to this audience. So this is actually an active Kickstarter. I think it hasn't finished yet, but
So chaos, yeah.
so chaos read victory. So what if gardening were a competitive game and you wanted to reap what someone else sowed? So in this game, this is a real Kickstarter game. I think they raised over $200,000 of like a $1,500 target or something. You basically decide which plants you want to plant, and you have various game mechanics to be able to interact with other players. So instead of everyone having their own garden with no interaction among the table, you have an opportunity to like steal someone else's plants or prevent them from achieving a goal. And again,
But what they do.
this is an opportunity for bringing people into gardening through people that are naturally competitive. Oh, this is a really engaging game. Oh, I never knew about the topics that were in this game. It's a great way to reach people, again, outside of the typical demographics who are inherently interested and were taught about these topics from maybe a mentor or a parental figure. So if you want to buy someone a gift, maybe this would send that kind of message and introduce them to it, especially if they enjoy board games. So let's see, I'm still approaching the end here.
There's another Kickstarter one that talks about botanical exploration, as I recall.
Which one?
I can't remember the.
Botanical exploration?
Yeah, but it talks about the history of, people going out to.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to, I'll probably write an article on a couple of firms on some of these board games. So if you're interested in checking these out, there'll be a list of links too as well. But they have raised $231,000 so far, and I just took this screenshot earlier this morning with 17 days to go. So there's a very strong interest in how can you take your love of gardening, of environmental activism, of all these topics, and potentially introduce it to new audiences, or simply share it and, think about what you would do if you had a fantasy garden that you had to compete with others to maintain.
Nature themed board games have been pretty trendy the last couple of years. So
Yeah, it's
definitely up and coming.
I think it's there hasn't been a lot in the way of studies about the connection between playing these board games and interest and care for the environment. But I do know there have been studies on things like Cards for Calamity that have shown that they've increased critical thinking and they have a positive impact on in the classroom and introducing students to topics. So to wrap up, serious games is actually something that everyone here can either look more into, share your favorites, potentially try out, even if you don't identify as a gamer. And we hope you all will try out our Lost in the Scrub game when it is ready. And potentially check out adventure games if you haven't considered adventure games in the past. That game genre is amazing, and I highly recommend. Thank you.
So will you post it on the
I will post a short article on the Couple Bird website on games related to environmentalism and gardening, because I think everybody would be able to just click on and check them out. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll collect and share the slides from those who are available.
Happy to address any questions or talk afterwards as well.
Well, the simulation to me is the highest level of learning,
Yeah,
so it's good to see efforts being put into that.
yeah, it's really tough.
Physics, in Colorado, and, happy to see that they're getting, that was a little bland, right, almost like the 90s, but that they're getting more creative with it.
Yeah, and there's actually a new board game by the creators of Pandemic. What is the name of that one? I thought I had it, but apparently
You
not.
do. If you go back a few slides, you've got it on your.
Oh yeah, I have it on my title slide.
Great set. Oh, you're good. Yeah, that was back. So I think he can try to go with this one.
It's fine.
So Daybreak, Pandemic is a cooperative board game, which is fantastic if you're not interested in having competition at game night. And that designer's new game, Daybreak, is collectively addressing challenges of climate change bringing group together with a pretty intense simulation of the mechanics thereof to try to make good decisions. And it really highlights some of those same challenges with the Cards Against Humanity, but at a larger scale.
I noticed some of these games were done back in the 90s.
Yep.
Which are these are the most recent?
The most recent one, I would probably say Baba Yaga was probably 2021.
And then Daybreak is this year.
Vicious Gardens is not even out yet, so that's probably the most recent.
And then Brave Fish was originally 94, but we remastered a few years ago to have
Yeah.
more graphical.
And it's available on the Switch.
Forest Shuffle is also a really big one.
Yes.
Forest Shuffle, okay. What platform?
Or it's a card game.
It's card game.
And it-
Forest Shuffle, we'll add it to the list.
You have to like plant trees and then you have to plant for, integrate other animals or plants with the forest you're playing out on the table. It's pretty interactive and I really like it for playing with my husband, but I'm always like, I wish these were coordinated plants animals.
Well, then, you should create that game. There you go. Forest Shuffle. Go ahead.
For COPS already, you know what you do to sign up to be beta testers?
Yes.
Could you please talk a little bit more about what you look for in beta testers, like what that entails?
Sure, absolutely. It basically, mainly bugs, but also feedback in terms of, did you lose your interest at any point? Is there any character you want to hear more about? So any of that early feedback is so valuable to game developers, not just like, I couldn't get past this stage, but it could also be, I couldn't figure out the solution to this puzzle. So those are all things that early users can give feedback on before you publish it, say, to the Couple of Friends website, or post it, of course, as we'd love to do at some of these parks where people can then download it and check it out. And then, of course, draw attention to other opportunities to engage with the community after they play the game. Yeah, thank you. All right, yes.
I started teaching 4-H,
Mhm.
and it was called Junior Master Gardener. And unfortunately, the book was written in 2000.
Yeah,
and
out of date.
nothing was really relevant to now. There was a lot of things about making things out of milk jugs.
Yeah,
And, you know, I just got thrown into it, but, so I was always trying to be
Absolutely.
creative, try to figure out, bring in YouTube videos, but this would just be really, really good.
yeah, those types of games would absolutely, especially the board games, honestly. You could also have students create their own games. Like they once they're given a little bit of the basics, then they could try to say, all right, turn what you just learned into a card game. And that would also make them really engaged, especially if they played
The
other
only
games.
game I brought, it was called Wildlife Bingo.
Yep,
And, to make sure, you know, if there's a gap in time, well, pretty soon they're like, well, when are we gonna play bingo? When are we gonna play bingo? So,
yeah,
but there was a limit to that, you know,
Yeah.
they were saying the names of the wildlife.
It
but
was
they
more for
weren't
rote
learning
memorization.
anything. Yeah,
road memorization. So there's definitely,
yeah,
it's hard to design a great simulation game because you have to deeply understand the relationships between the elements. So like if you want to take care of a habitat, you may be able to do prescribed burns, but then you might potentially have the residents nearby be angry at you and cut your funding, right? Those kinds of relationships are hard to put into a game unless you understand the first place. So I would suggest, yeah, looking at some existing games that were developed by experts that did that, but also potentially thinking about a simpler board games, because you don't need a lot of programming experience or other expertise to create a simple card game that can show off something beyond, again, like the bingo style rote learning.
does it cost a lot?
To make a video game or a,
Video.
so I would say there are some tools that are actually free and openly available. Adventure Game Studio is one example of them. There's also Bitly, which is another game where our students can create basically a simple navigate around in the web browser for no cost and interact with characters. So there's a number of free and openly available game creation software that isn't Unity, that isn't Unreal, which are the more professional 3D and expert oriented game
What about the
development.
one you're doing, is that?
So the one we're doing, we're probably gonna end up using Unity, but in part because I already know Unity. If I were to do it without Unity, something like P5JS would be another option. It's like an online kind of JavaScript-based game engine. P5JS,
JavaScript one is the world.
yeah.
Oh.
So-
Born? I thought it was Java.
So if I go down to
JavaScript, it's basically
examples here.
everything we use now.
Huh.
It's on the web.
And then of course, Scratch is another place where you could create games. So here's, let's see. Like, this is free and openly available along with all the tools to learn it. There's like a number of tutorials online. Same thing for Bitly, which is a is it Bitly or
Bitsy is what you're thinking.
Yes, Bitsy, not Bitly. So Bitsy is essentially this little cute game, but there's a lot of creativity. So kind of like others, you just click on it and play it in the browser, and you navigate, and it has this kind of basic text-based interface, and navigate around the environment, interacting with things.
And if you're thinking this looks too retro for kids today,
No.
retro is currently cool. So you've got a window here.
So-
No, these are back, if you've seen the target, it's alarming.
If you absolutely have access to computers, it's very easy to teach kids how to create a simple game or see a number of examples with Bitly without any cost whatsoever. So just a web browser is all it's needed.
A question on that regarding
Mhm.
security and data collection.
Bitly, I'm pretty sure it's all local storage.
Yeah, Bitsy doesn't require an account, it doesn't collect the information, it makes it very friendly to have children.
You can log in, but you can also create one.
That's it.
That's if you want to post a child, right?
And the P5 one.
P5
is
same
not
thing.
created now.
Yeah, so if I click make a game here, it basically loads the entire editor up in the browser. I didn't have to sign in or anything. It just
Wow.
saves it as a file, and there's no accounts, no privacy issues there. And
I can teach somebody to make a game that's like set in their house or at a local preserve with this in an hour. And so it's really effective with student groups. It's a great way to personalize learning of a place and take something that's material and take it into a digital concept.
And then the last tool I will mention is Twine. Twine is a interactive storytelling platform that allows you to create text-based games. So this is one where you could choose a number of options, and it's also free, and it also doesn't require an account to develop stories for it. And in fact, there's a number of stories that have been developed and published from Twine that make its way onto other platforms. But if I go over here, you'll see I can just create a new story and then write a series of text-based passages that link to each other as a hypertext and just publish this to a website.
I use this. Yeah, it's another great tool. And you can actually simulate very complex concepts there without knowing much about programming, because
Yep.
you're just writing out as choices.
So I just
Writing
created,
out complex decision points and consequences, which is a great way to develop systems thinking.
so I'm just using these two brackets here to create two passages that then can be chosen between when you play it. So this becomes a choice-based game. So I can hit test from here, and I can then go to the forest or to the meadow.
So they learn.
They learned basically agency, how you can make a game where the player makes decisions, rather than just a story where you're told step after step. And again, this doesn't require any programming to get that basic choice-based narrative down. And it's something anyone here can check out on a web browser. It's twinery.org, and I'll post that link as well with the rest of the resources.
We have a lot of free tutorials for both of these tools. Actually, my former graduate student, Dan Cox, has all sorts of resources on this. So if anyone's interested in doing this with a student group, the copy get started.
Sounds good.
Yep.
Sure.
We'll-
And I'm full interactive media section to the. Well, now I'm here.
All right, thank you very much. I think we're out of time.